The night of May 19th, 2025, began like any other in Abidjan, the bustling economic capital of Ivory Coast. The city's vibrant streets hummed with life vendors packing up their stalls, late-night traffic weaving through the metropolis, families settling in for the evening. But as the clock struck midnight, a sinister silence fell over the city, as if the heartbeat of the nation itself had skipped a beat. Suddenly, the calm shattered. Gunshots erupted in rapid succession, echoing through the narrow alleys and wide boulevards alike. The sound was deafening, a violent punctuation mark on the night's stillness. Streetlights flickered and died, plunging Abidjan into a blackout that seemed to swallow the city whole. Panic spread quickly. Residents barricaded themselves indoors, windows shuttered, and phones buzzed with frantic messages. By dawn, the unthinkable was whispered from corner to corner. President Alassane Ouattara had vanished. The news was met with disbelief and fear. How could the leader of one of West Africa's most stable countries disappear without a trace? The official government channels remained silent, fueling rumors and speculation. The state-controlled media broadcasted nothing but routine programming, avoiding any mention of the unrest. Internet services were disrupted nationwide, cutting off the flow of information and deepening the sense of isolation. Social media platforms, however, became a wildfire of conjecture. Videos surfaced showing armed men in military fatigues moving through government buildings. Anonymous posts claimed the president had been captured by a rogue faction within the military. Others suggested he had been assassinated or fled the country under threat. The truth was elusive, buried beneath layers of fear and misinformation. The violence that night was not isolated. Over 33 people lost their lives in clashes between security forces and unidentified armed groups. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded, and the streets bore the scars of chaos: burned out vehicles, shattered glass, and the acrid smell of smoke. International observers expressed grave concern. The United Nations and African Union called for calm and restraint, urging all parties to respect constitutional order. Yet, behind the diplomatic language lay a deep unease. Ivory Coast was teetering on the brink of a crisis that could destabilize the entire region. The political context was complex. President Ouattara's recent decision to seek a controversial third term had already polarized the nation. Opposition leaders, including former Prime Minister Guillaume Soro and businessman-turned-politician Tidjane Thiam, had called for protests and denounced the government's heavy-handed tactics. The exclusion of Thiam from the presidential race on citizenship grounds had further inflamed tensions. Ivory Coast's history was marked by coups and civil wars, and the specter of past violence loomed large. The 2010 to 2011 post-election crisis, which claimed over 3,000 lives, was still fresh in the collective memory. Many feared a repeat of that dark chapter. As the sun rose over a city gripped by fear, one question dominated every conversation: where was President Ouattara? While the elite debated in closed rooms and foreign diplomats issued statements, the people of Ivory Coast and the broader African continent took to the streets and social media to voice their hopes, fears, and demands. In Abidjan's working-class neighborhoods, young protesters gathered, waving flags and chanting slogans, demanding sovereignty and justice. No more foreign puppets, they cried. Africa must stand united. Their voices echoed through the city's markets and schools, carried by a new generation determined to reclaim their future. Across West Africa, solidarity demonstrations erupted. In Bamako, Mali, and Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, crowds marched in support of the Ivorian people, condemning foreign military presence and interference. The rise of the Alliance of Sahel States, a coalition rejecting Western influence and promoting African self-determination, had inspired a wave of pan-Africanist fervor. On digital platforms, hashtags like Free Ivory Coast and End Neocolonialism trended for days. Commentators and activists debated the implications of the unrest, framing it as part of a larger struggle against imperialism. The narrative was clear: this was not just a fight for one nation's leadership, but a battle for Africa's soul. Among the most influential voices was Dr. Orkana Chihumbori Kwao, former African Union ambassador to the United States and a passionate advocate for African unity. In a viral video message, she declared, "The disappearance of President Ouattara is a symptom of a deeper sickness, a continent shackled by foreign powers who manipulate our leaders and divide our people. We must unite, tear down these neocolonial chains, and build a future where Africa governs itself, free and proud." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring grassroots movements and independent media channels to amplify calls for transparency, accountability, and true independence. Yet the situation was not without complexity. Some questioned whether the president's disappearance was a genuine crisis or a calculated political maneuver. Others worried that the unrest could be exploited by foreign interests seeking to destabilize the region further. Despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear: the people demanded change. They demanded a voice, and they demanded to be heard. As the city struggled to make sense of the chaos, a team of investigators was dispatched to the presidential palace, the seat of power now eerily silent. The palace, a sprawling complex of marble and glass, stood as a symbol of Ivory Coast's modern ambitions. But that morning, it felt more like a mausoleum. Inside President Ouattara's office, the scene was surreal. The room was in disarray, as if the occupant had fled in haste. Papers littered the floor, drawers yawned open, and personal belongings were scattered across the desk. The president's signature mahogany desk, usually immaculate, bore the marks of a frantic departure. On the desk lay a single sealed envelope addressed to the people of Ivory Coast. The letter inside was typed, but the tone was urgent and personal. It began, "My fellow Ivorians, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer able to speak to you directly. I have been forced into the hiding by forces that seek to control our nation and betray our people. I write to reveal truths, long hidden truths about secret military bases, foreign alliances, and betrayals that threaten our sovereignty and our future." The letter went on to expose a series of clandestine agreements between the Ivorian government and Western powers, including the United States and France. Documents found in a hidden safe within the office corroborated these claims: contracts, financial records, and intelligence reports detailing the establishment of a U.S. military base near the borders of Burkina Faso and Mali. This base, Ouattara wrote, was a betrayal of pan-African ideals and a provocation to regional powers seeking to assert African sovereignty. He warned that the presence of foreign troops on African soil was not a guarantee of security but a threat to independence. The letter also revealed fractures within the government itself. Several high-ranking officials were implicated in covert deals, enriching themselves at the expense of the nation. Ouattara expressed deep regret for the compromises he had made, but insisted that his ultimate goal was to protect Ivory Coast from greater harm. The final paragraphs were a call to action. "To the people of Ivory Coast and all Africans, I urge you to stand united. Our destiny must be forged by our own hands, free from foreign puppetry and neocolonial chains." The discovery sent shockwaves through the government and the public alike. The letter was leaked to independent media outlets and quickly spread across social networks. Supporters hailed Ouattara as a hero, risking everything for the truth. Critics accused him of cowardice and deception. Meanwhile, intelligence agencies and foreign diplomats scrambled to assess the implications. The presence of sensitive documents in the president's office raised questions about security breaches and internal betrayals. Who had betrayed Ouattara? Who was orchestrating the unrest? And what was the true extent of foreign involvement? The disappearance of President Ouattara and the revelations found in his office transformed Ivory Coast's political crisis into a continental flashpoint. It was no longer just about one man or one nation. It was about the future of African sovereignty, unity, and resistance against neocolonialism. The people's voices grew louder, the streets more restless, and the world more watchful. The sun had barely risen when whispers began to circulate within the corridors of power. President Alassane Ouattara was alive. not only alive, but hidden away in a secret location, protected by a loyal cadre of trusted aides and military officers. The news was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. If the president had escaped, then who was behind the violent chaos that had engulfed Abidjan? And how deep did the betrayal run? It was just past midnight when Ouattara's trusted aide, Captain Diarra, received the urgent call. The palace was no longer secure. A faction within the presidential guard, disillusioned and swayed by promises from shadowy figures, had turned against the president. The plan was clear: capture or eliminate Ouattara before dawn. Without hesitation, Awa mobilized a small, elite team. The president was rushed through a labyrinth of underground tunnels beneath the palace's secret network built decades ago during Ivory Coast's turbulent history. Cloaked in darkness, they slipped past checkpoints manned by insurgents, the distant sounds of gunfire echoing above. Outside the palace walls, a convoy of unmarked vehicles awaited. The journey was perilous, weaving through deserted streets and checkpoints manned by hostile forces. Every moment was a gamble. A single mistake could mean death or capture. Hours later, Ouattara arrived at a safe house on the outskirts of Abidjan, a fortified compound surrounded by dense foliage and guarded by loyalists. Here he was safe for now. But safety was fragile. The president's inner circle was fractured. Among those closest to him lurked a traitor, someone who had leaked his escape plan to the insurgents. General Kofi, once Ouattara's most trusted military advisor, had become a shadowy figure with shifting loyalties. Behind closed doors, Kofi had met with foreign intelligence operatives and opposition leaders, weaving a complex web of alliances. His motivations were murky: personal ambition, ideological conviction, or manipulation by external powers. Kofi's betrayal was the linchpin of the coup attempt. By controlling key military units and intelligence channels, he orchestrated the blackout, the gunfire, and the blackout of communications. Yet Kofi was not acting alone. Behind the scenes, an enigmatic figure pulled strings from the shadows. A former insider turned rogue, known only by the codename Le Phoenix. Le Phoenix was rumored to be a former intelligence chief with deep ties to both Western agencies and Pan-African rebel groups. His identity remained a closely guarded secret, fueling endless speculation. Some believed Le Phoenix sought to destabilize Ivory Coast to force a radical political reset, a cleansing of corrupt elites and foreign influence. Others suspected he was a pawn in a larger game, played by global powers seeking to maintain control over West Africa's resources and strategic position. Inside the safe house, Ouattara convened a small council of loyalists. The atmosphere was tense, thick with fear and determination. "We cannot trust anyone outside these walls," Ouattara said, his voice steady but weary. "Our enemies are within and without. We must act swiftly to reclaim our nation." Plans were drawn for a counter-operation, a covert mission to regain control of key government institutions and restore communications. But the risks were immense. The city was crawling with hostile forces, and every move could trigger another wave of violence. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Abidjan, Kofi and Le Phoenix coordinated their next moves. The city was a chessboard, and the stakes were nothing less than Ivory Coast's future. Amidst this high-stakes political drama, the people of Ivory Coast remained the true power. Their protests, their voices, and their resilience shaped the unfolding crisis. Grassroots networks organized food and medical aid for victims of the unrest. Independent journalists risked their lives to report the truth, circumventing internet blackouts with ingenious methods. Social media became a battlefield of narratives between propaganda and hope. The pan-Africanist message grew louder. This was a fight not just for Ivory Coast, but for all Africa's sovereignty. As the sun set on a city divided, the question lingered in every mind. Would Ouattara's loyalists succeed in reclaiming the capital? Could the traitors be unmasked before it was too late? And who truly was Le Phoenix, savior or destroyer? The night promised more secrets, more betrayals, and more battles in the shadows. What do you think is the true motive behind the coup? Is the Phoenix a hero or a villain? Share your theories below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow this gripping story as it unfolds. Together we will regain our country and continent,